My name is Valisra, and I was 94 years old the day I destroyed my empire with 17 words. I did not know it then. I thought I was teaching a lesson. I thought I was defending my mother's honor. I thought many foolish things that day, and by sunset, none of them mattered anymore. The obsidian hall was full. I remember the air tasted like burnt metal from the old incense my mother preferred. 43 delegations had come to the audience that morning, but only one mattered: the humans. They had arrived 3 days before in a ship that looked like nothing our engineers had ever seen. Small, quiet, no visible weapons, no banners, no ceremonial markings. It had slipped past our outer defense grid without triggering a single alarm, and our admirals were still arguing about how. I was seated on the second tier of the royal dais, behind my mother, the Empress Thalen of the Seven Crowns. My 2 older sisters sat to her left. I sat to the right, the youngest, the least important, permitted to observe but never to speak. I had been promised this honor for a decade, my first real audience. I wore my grandmother's silver circlet and a gown stitched with threads of true platinum, and I felt very grand, very important, very ready to prove myself worthy of my blood. Then the human walked in. His name was Director Harold Pike. He was old by human standards, maybe 60 of their years, with gray hair cut short and a plain dark suit that had no decoration of any kind. No sash, no medal, no crest on his chest. He carried a small flat device in his hand and nothing else. Behind him came 2 aides, a young woman and a young man, dressed the same way. They walked into the greatest throne room in the known galaxy the way a man might walk into a shop to buy bread. The court gasped. Every delegation from every world had prostrated themselves before my mother upon entering, every single one for my entire life. But the human did not kneel. He did not bow. He stopped at the correct distance, nodded his head once and said, in perfectly clear standard trade speech, "Empress Thalen, thank you for seeing us." My hands tightened on the arms of my chair. I felt heat rush to my face. How dare he? How dare he stand before my mother as though she were some village elder, some minor trader, some equal? I looked at my mother, waiting for her to strike him down with a word, to order him removed, to demand the respect owed to the blood of the 7 crowns. She did none of these things. She smiled. She actually smiled at him. She said, "Director Pike, welcome to our court. Please be at ease." At ease, as though he needed her permission, as though he had ever been anything but at ease. The negotiations began. I listened with growing disbelief. The humans had something we wanted. A device called a fold stabilizer, a piece of technology that could cut travel time between our colonies by more than 3/4. Our scientists had been trying to build one for 22 years. They had failed. The humans had built theirs in 4 years, and they would not share the design, and they would not sell it, but they would license the use of it under their terms. Their terms were not small. Mining rights in a belt we had claimed for 1,000 years. 3 treaties of non-aggression that would bind us to leave certain human colonies alone. And worst of all, formal recognition of the human Sol Protectorate as a stellar power equal to our dominion. Equal, the word hit me like cold water. The humans had existed in space for less than 200 years. We had ruled 47 worlds for 6,000. And this man, this plain gray man with his plain gray suit, was asking my mother to call him her equal. My mother was going to agree. I could see it in her face. She was calculating, weighing, preparing to bend. And the humans simply stood there, patient as stones, waiting for her to give them what they wanted. Something inside me broke. I do not know how else to describe it. It was not a thought. It was not a plan. It was the pure, hot, stupid pride of a girl who had never once in her life been told that her blood did not make her the most important person in any room. I stood up. I stepped forward. I spoke. "Director Pike," I said, my voice ringing clear across the obsidian hall, "you will show proper respect to the Empress of the 7 Crowns, or you will be reminded of your place by those better suited to teach you." The silence that followed was the longest silence of my life. My mother did not turn to look at me. She closed her eyes. I remember thinking in that small moment that she looked very tired. I did not understand why. Director Pike turned his head slowly. He looked at me, really looked for the first time since he had entered the hall. His eyes were a pale, flat gray, and they held no anger, no insult, nothing at all. He looked at me the way a man might look at a piece of furniture that had unexpectedly begun to speak. Then he looked away. He turned back to my mother. He picked up his small, flat device from the table before him. He tucked it into the inside pocket of his suit. He nodded to his two aides, and without saying a single word, without any show of anger or any gesture of protest, he turned and walked toward the great doors of the obsidian hall. I stood there frozen, waiting for him to stop, waiting for him to turn back, waiting for him to respond, to apologize, to do anything at all that would make sense of what was happening. He did not stop. He did not turn. The great doors opened before him, and he walked through them, and his two aides walked behind him, and the doors closed. The silence in the hall grew heavier. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear the soft rustle of my mother's robes as she lowered her head. I was still standing. I was still waiting. I was, in some part of my mind, still certain that this was a small thing, a misunderstanding, a moment that would pass. I was certain my mother would turn to me and praise me for defending her honor. I was certain the other delegations would nod in approval. I was certain, with the beautiful certainty of a 94-year-old girl who had never been wrong about anything because no one had ever dared to tell her she was. My mother raised her hand, a single gesture. The audience was over. The delegations rose in confused silence and began to leave. No one looked at me, not one of them. Not the ambassadors I had known since childhood, not the old lords who had bounced me on their knees, not the servants who had dressed me that morning. They kept their eyes on the floor and they walked out, and the obsidian hall emptied around me like water draining from a broken cup, and still I stood, and still I waited for someone to tell me what I had done. My mother did not rise. She sat on her throne, her face in her hands, and she stayed that way until the last delegate was gone and the great doors had closed for the final time that day. Then slowly she lifted her head. She looked at me. Her eyes were wet. I had never seen my mother cry. Not when my father died. Not when the plague took my brother. Not when the southern provinces rebelled and burned for 3 years. Not once in 94 years had I ever seen a tear on the face of Empress Thalen of the 7 Crowns. She was crying now. "Vailisra," she said, and her voice was very quiet, very careful, the way a person speaks when they are holding something fragile and terrible in their hands. "Do you know what you have just done?" I opened my mouth. I was going to say that I had defended her. I was going to say that the human had been insolent. I was going to say many brave and stupid things. I did not get the chance, because in that moment across the great windows of the obsidian hall I saw a flash of light rising into the sky. A small ship, plain and unmarked, climbing fast and silent through the clouds above the capital. The human ship, leaving. And I knew, with the first true cold fear I had ever felt in my life, that something very large and very terrible had just happened, and that I, Princess Vailisra of the 7 Crowns, had been the one to cause it. My mother rose from her throne. She walked down from the dais. She stopped in front of me and she looked at me for a long, long moment, and she did not slap me, and she did not scold me, and she did not embrace me. She just looked, and her eyes were the saddest eyes I had ever seen. "Come with me," she said. "There are things you need to understand, and we do not have much time." I followed her out of the obsidian hall. The great doors closed behind us. Somewhere above the capital, the human ship was already punching through the upper atmosphere, gathering speed, preparing to fold back to its own stars. I did not know it yet. But I would spend the next 200 years of my life trying to undo what I had done in the last 17 minutes, and I would never fully succeed. But all of that was still ahead of me. In that moment, walking down the cold stone corridor behind my weeping mother, I knew only one thing for certain. The plain gray human had walked away without a glance, and the weight of that silence was already beginning to crush my world. My mother led me down corridors I had never seen, past the public halls, past the private chambers, down a narrow stone staircase behind a tapestry I had walked past 1,000 times without noticing, At the bottom of the staircase was a single door, and behind the door was a small round room with no windows, lit only by a pale blue light that came from the ceiling. A war room. A crisis room. The place my mother took only her most trusted advisors, and only when the empire was in true danger. She closed the door behind us. She sat down on one of the two chairs. She pointed to the other. I sat. "Valisra," she said, "I need you to listen to me now the way you have never listened to anything in your life. I need you to listen with your whole heart, because if you do not understand what I am about to tell you, our dominion will not survive your generation." I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to say 100 things. I said nothing. There was something in my mother's face that I had never seen before, and it closed my mouth for me. "The humans," she said, "are not what you think they are. They are not a young species. They are not a small species. They are not a species we can intimidate or command or teach. They are something new, and the galaxy is still learning what they are, and your ignorance of this fact has just cost us everything." She stood up. She began to pace. Her hands were shaking. "Do you know what they do, Valisra, when they are insulted? They do not shout. They do not fight. They do not even protest. They simply leave, and they do not come back, ever." I frowned. "Then we have lost nothing. Let them go. We will find our fold stabilizer elsewhere, or we will build our own, and if they dare to return." My mother turned on me so fast I flinched. "There is no one else, Valisra. There is nowhere else. No other species has built what they have built. No other species can build it. Our scientists have tried for 22 years and failed. The Varath have tried for 30 and failed. The Kelvash tried for 60 years, and when they finally gave up, they offered the humans 3 planets and a royal marriage for the license. The humans refused. Do you know why?" I did not know. I shook my head. "Because 80 years before that, a Kelvash governor insulted a human merchant in a market. Just a merchant. A man selling textiles, nothing important. The governor called him a name, and the humans remembered. For 80 years they remembered. And when the Kelvash finally came begging, the humans said no, and the Kelvash are now a minor power, scratching at the edges of the galaxy, selling off their moons to pay their debts." I felt cold. I felt very cold. "The Ruathi," my mother continued, "executed a human researcher 90 years ago. A mistake, a misunderstanding about a law the researcher did not know he had broken. The humans did not send a fleet. They did not send a protest. They simply closed the Sol Gate to all Ruathi traffic, just that. No trade, no travel, no communication. The Ruathi lost access to 3 of their own colonies because those colonies could only be reached by human fold routes. Within 40 years, 2 of those colonies had starved. Within 60, the Ruathi conquered had collapsed. The humans never fired a shot." "But," I whispered, "that is cruelty, that is." "That is patience, Valisra. That is what patience looks like in a species that lives short but remembers long. They do not punish us the way we would punish. They do not rage. They simply close their doors and they wait, and they watch us fail without them." I sat very still. My hands were cold in my lap. I remembered the gray eyes of Director Pike, the way they had looked at me and then looked away. I remembered the quiet way he had tucked his small device into his coat. I remembered the closing of the great doors. "What have I done?" I asked. My voice did not sound like my own. My mother sat back down. She took my hands in hers. Her hands were warm, mine were ice. "You have told the most powerful civilization in this arm of the galaxy that we consider them beneath us. You have done this in front of 42 other delegations. By sunset tomorrow, every court in the Dominion will know. By sunset next week, every human on every human world will know. And the humans will do what they always do. They will walk away. They have already begun." I began to shake. I could not stop. My mother held my hands tighter. "Listen to me. We will try. We will send apologies. We will send envoys. We will offer concessions. But I must tell you, daughter, with the honesty I have never given you before because I loved you too much and spoiled you too long, it will probably not be enough. Not in my lifetime. Perhaps not in yours. The humans have walked away from greater insults from greater powers, and they have not come back for centuries." What you have done today, in those few seconds when your pride was louder than your sense, may take 200 years to repair. It may never be repaired at all. I wept. I wept the way a child weeps when she first understands that the world is larger and colder than her small pride ever imagined it could be. My mother held me, and she wept with me, and for a long time there was no sound in that small blue room except the sound of two proud women learning, too late, what pride had cost them. When I could speak again, I asked her what I should do. She looked at me with eyes full of love and sorrow, and a strange, distant hope. "You will help me try," she said. "We will send every envoy we have. We will offer everything we can offer. And if they refuse us, as I believe they will, then you will begin to do the only thing that may ever matter. You will begin to learn." Learn what? Learn what you should have learned before you ever spoke today. What they are, who they are, why they are the way they are. If there is any hope for our dominion in the long centuries ahead, it will come from a Valisra who has learned what she did not know today. Not the princess who stood in the obsidian hall, a different Valisra, a better one. I nodded. I did not trust my voice. She rose. She kissed my forehead the way she had not done since I was a child. "Go to your chambers. Rest. Tomorrow the work begins, and it will be long, and it will be hard, and it will probably break your heart many times before it is done." It did break my heart, many times. The first break came 3 days later. My mother sent her most senior envoy to the human liaison ship that still orbited our capital, a formal delegation bearing an apology sealed with the imperial crest. The envoy was refused audience. The ship departed that same evening. It did not respond to any further communication. 2 weeks later, a diplomatic packet arrived from the Sol Protectorate. It contained a single page. It read, in polite and careful language, that all negotiations between the Terran conquered and the Dominion of the Seven Crowns were suspended for a period of review. It did not say how long the review would last. It did not say what would end it. It was signed by Director Harold Pike. The second break came 6 months later, when we learned that the humans had signed a fold stabilizer licensing agreement with the Varith Combine. The terms were better than the ones they had offered us. The Varith ambassador, an old and tired woman named Keshthra, had knelt in formal apology to Director Pike for an unrelated insult her grandfather had offered to a human trader 80 years before. The humans had accepted her apology. They had shared their technology. The Varith, who had been our equals for 1,000 years, began to pull ahead of us that year. They have never stopped pulling ahead. The third break came slowly, over many years. Our tributary systems, watching our ships grow slower while Varith ships grew faster, began to question why they paid us tribute. 2 rebelled outright within a decade. 4 more drifted away in the decades that followed. Our empire, which had been 47 worlds on the morning I stood up in the obsidian hall, was 38 worlds by the time I turned 120. The fourth break came when my mother died. She was very old by then and very tired, and the last thing she said to me was, "Keep trying, keep learning, do not give up." I promised her I would not. I kept that promise. It was the hardest promise I have ever kept. And through all of it, I was the princess who had lost the humans. The whispers followed me through every hall, every banquet, every council meeting. No one said it to my face. No one needed to. I could see it in the way the eyes slid past me, in the way the conversations grew quiet when I entered a room, in the way my sisters stopped inviting me to their celebrations. I became, slowly, a ghost in my own palace. The girl who had spoken out of turn. The girl who had broken the empire. I came to accept it. I had to, it was true. What I could not accept, what I would not accept, was that my mother's last wish should die with her. She had told me to learn. So I would learn. And I would keep learning, no matter how long it took, and no matter how much it cost me, and no matter whether anyone else in the galaxy ever knew that I had tried. So on the morning of my 146th birthday, I signed a document that released me from my royal duties. I gave my titles to my elder sister, who was a better ruler than I would ever be. I took a new name that I will not write here because it does not matter. I packed a small bag. I boarded a civilian transport. and I left the capital of the Seven Crowns for a planet I had never seen, a small wet world at the edge of human space, to study at a human university the subject of xenopolitical ethics, as an ordinary student, with no crown and no servants, and no one anywhere who knew who I had been. The flight took 3 months. The humans had not opened their fold routes to Dominion travelers, so I had to travel the slow way through old merchant corridors on a ship full of traders and pilgrims and one very quiet young priestess from a world I had never heard of. I spent most of the flight reading. I read everything I could find about humans, written by humans, not our intelligence reports, not our diplomatic briefings. Their own words, in their own languages, which I had been teaching myself for years. I read their old books. I read a book by a man named Marcus who had been a king of some kind 2,000 years before, and who had written a small, quiet book about how to live well when one has great power. I read a book by a woman named Jane about families and marriages and the small daily work of becoming a better person. I read a book by a man named Fyodor about a man who had done a terrible thing and spent the rest of his life trying to understand why. I cried at that one. I cried a great deal. The more I read, the more I began to understand something I had never understood in the Obsidian Hall. The humans did not measure worth the way we did. They did not care about blood or titles or ancient crowns. They measured a person by what they did, by what they built, by how they treated those who could give them nothing in return. By that measure, I had been nothing my whole life. I had been born into everything and earned nothing, and I had stood in a great hall and demanded respect from a man who had spent 60 years earning his, and he had looked at me and seen exactly what I was. He had not been cruel, he had been accurate. The ship landed in a gray, rainy port city on a small green world called Earth. I walked down the ramp carrying my single bag, and no one greeted me, and no one bowed, and no one knew my name, and for the first time in my life, I felt something I had never felt before. I felt free. I felt free and small and full of a kind of hope I did not yet have a name for. The rain fell on my silver skin, and a human customs officer looked at my papers and said, "Welcome to Earth, miss. Enjoy your stay." He did not call me Highness. He called me Miss. I almost cried at that, too. The work of becoming a better person had begun. It would take the rest of my life, and it would be harder than anything I had ever done, and I would not know, for a very long time, whether it would ever be enough. But I had started, and that, in the end, was the only thing that had ever mattered. The city was called Edinburgh, and it rained almost every day, and I loved it from the first week. I rented a small room above a bakery on a cobblestone street. The baker was a round, cheerful man named Peter Hollies, and his wife was a thin, sharp woman named Margaret, and they treated me with a mild, kind friendliness that asked no questions and expected no special treatment. I paid my rent on time. I took my bread from the shop in the mornings. I walked to the university in the rain. The university was 800 years old. I learned this on my first day, from a kind old man at the registration office who told me the history of the place as he processed my papers. 800 years. My grandmother had not yet been born when this university was already 200 years old. I stood in a courtyard made of stones that had been laid by humans who had never seen a starship, who had thought the world was the center of the universe, who had known nothing of fold drives or dominions or empires beyond the sky. And I felt, standing there, very small and very young, even though I was nearly 150 years old, and the humans around me would all be dead in 60 or 70 years. My professor was a woman named Dr. Ellen Whitmore. She had white hair that she wore in a tight knot at the back of her head, and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing, and a voice that could cut glass. She taught xenopolitical ethics. She was the reason I had come to this university. I had read 3 of her books on my long flight from the Dominion, and I had decided that if I was going to learn to think like a human, I wanted to learn from her. On my first day in her class, she called on me. I had not expected it. I had expected to sit quietly at the back, unnoticed for at least the first few weeks. She looked at me over her reading glasses and she said, "You, the tall one, what is the primary failure of hierarchical diplomacy?" I answered too quickly with the standard Dominion answer. I spoke about the difficulty of maintaining consistent protocols across species with different status markers. I spoke for perhaps 2 minutes. I thought I sounded quite intelligent. Dr. Whitmore listened. When I finished, she removed her glasses. She said, "That was a textbook answer. It is the answer a student gives when she has memorized the chapter but has not thought about the question. Try again." My face burned. No one had ever spoken to me that way. No one had ever corrected me in public. I opened my mouth and closed it. I had no other answer. I had only the textbook answer. I had never been asked to think beyond it. "I do not know," I said finally. Dr. Whitmore smiled. It was a small smile, not unkind. She said, "Good. That is the beginning of learning. Sit down, think about it. Tell me next week." I sat down. I did not cry, though I wanted to, and I thought about it. I thought about it all week. At the end of the week, I handed her a written answer, 3 pages. I had worked on it every night. I had thrown away 6 drafts. I had written about my own experience without nomming it, about a young person raised in a culture where status was everything, who had learned too late that status was nothing, who had destroyed something valuable because she had mistaken her inherited position for earned authority. I did not mention the Obsidian Hall. I did not mention Director Pike. I wrote about the general problem, but the specific pain was in every line. Dr. Whitmore returned the paper a week later. At the top, in red ink, she had written one word, "Better." Below it, she had written a longer note. "This is the beginning of real thought. Keep going. You have potential." I held that paper in my hands and I stood in the rain in the university courtyard and I read the note 11 times. No one had ever told me I had potential. I had been told I had blood. I had been told I had titles. I had been told I was beautiful and noble and destined for greatness. No one in 146 years had ever told me I had potential, because potential is something you have to earn the right to be told you have, and I had never earned anything in my life. I wept in the rain. A young human woman passing by stopped and asked if I was all right. I told her I was. I told her I was very all right, better than I had ever been in my life. She looked at me strangely and walked on. I did not mind. I was not crying because I was sad. I was crying because someone had finally told me I had potential, and because I believed her, and because I was going to prove her right. I made friends slowly. Humans are strange friends at first. They tease. They argue. They tell you when you are being foolish, and they forgive you when you admit you were. A young man named Owen Braithwaite sat next to me in a philosophy class and made jokes about the reading until I finally laughed. A young woman named Priya Desai, who was studying human history, invited me to a student gathering at a pub called the Queen's Arms. I did not know what a pub was. I went anyway. I drank something called ale. I did not like it. I liked the people. They sang songs and argued about politics and teased each other, and no one asked me what my bloodline was, and no one cared that I was taller than them and silver-skinned, and from a world they had never visited. They asked me what I thought of the reading. They asked me what I thought of the local football team. They asked me what I thought. No one had ever asked me what I thought. For 146 years, people had asked me what I commanded, what I wanted, what I decreed. Never what I thought. I found that I liked being asked what I thought. I found that it made me think more carefully, because when people ask your opinion and will argue with it freely, you cannot be lazy about your opinions anymore. Owen taught me to cook. He came to my small room above the bakery one evening with a bag of vegetables and a pot, and he showed me how to make a simple pasta dish with tomatoes and garlic and olive oil. I had never cooked anything in my life. I had servants who cooked. I burned the garlic. Owen laughed at me, not cruelly, and showed me again. The second pot was better. The third was actually good. I ate it sitting on the floor of my small room, across from Owen, and it was the best meal I had ever eaten, because I had made it with my own hands. Priya took me walking in the hills above the city on weekends. She was studying the history of small wars, the kind fought between villages and counties, the kind that never made the big history books. She told me about them as we walked. She said the big wars were easy to understand because they had clear sides and clear reasons, but the small wars were the real history of humanity, because they were about neighbors who had forgotten how to be neighbors, and how hard it was to remember again. I thought about that. I thought about it a great deal. In my third year at the university, I found a book in the library. It was a textbook on modern interstellar diplomacy, published by the Terran Concord Press, written by a human scholar named Dr. Martin Ashcroft. Chapter 14 was titled The Th Corin Incident, a study in inherited authority. I sat down at a table in the reading room. I opened the chapter. My hands were shaking. It was all there: the date, the location, the participants, the words I had spoken, the walkout, the aftermath, the decades of slow decline. My name was not mentioned out of politeness, but everything else was. The chapter analyzed the incident as a case study in what Dr. Ashcroft called the hazard of unearned position. He wrote that the young princess had not been evil or stupid or even especially cruel. She had simply been raised in a system that had taught her every day of her life that her opinion was worth more than the opinions of those around her, and that the respect she was owed was greater than the respect she owed others. When she had met a culture that did not share these assumptions, she had not known how to behave, because she had never had to learn. The result, Dr. Ashcroft wrote, was a tragedy not only for her empire but for her. Because she was, he wrote, probably a person capable of better, who had been given a worse education than any peasant's child on earth, despite all the gold and silk that had been spent on her upbringing. I closed the book. I put my face in my hands. I sat in the reading room of the 800-year-old university for a long time, and I wept for the girl who had stood in the obsidian hall, and I wept for her mother who had tried to teach her and failed, and I wept for an empire that had given its princess everything except the one thing she had needed, which was the humility to be wrong. When I could stand again, I walked home through the rain. Owen was waiting for me at the bakery. He took one look at my face and did not ask. He walked me up the stairs to my room. He made me tea. He sat with me for 2 hours while I did not speak. Then, when I was ready, I told him. I told him everything: the obsidian hall, Director Pike, the walkout, the long, slow years of the Empire's decline, my mother's death, my decision to come to Earth. I told him who I was and who I had been and why I was here. Owen listened. He did not interrupt. When I finished, he sat quietly for a long time. Then he said, "That took a lot of courage to tell me." "It was not courage," I said. "It was shame." "Sometimes they look the same," he said. "I will remember that for the rest of my life." In my 4th year, I heard that Director Harold Pike, now very old, would be giving a final public lecture before his retirement. The lecture would be held at Oxford, 3 hours south of Edinburgh by train. The subject was patience, distance, and the long work of peace. I read the announcement 3 times. I did not sleep that night. In the morning, I bought a train ticket. The train was full. I sat by the window and watched the green English countryside slide past, and I did not know what I would do when I arrived. I did not know if I would even go to the lecture. I did not know if I could bear to see him. I knew only that I had to try. I arrived at Oxford in the late afternoon. The lecture was in a great old hall with wooden benches and high windows. I slipped into the back row just as the doors were closing. I wore a plain dark coat and a hat pulled low. I did not want him to see me. I did not want to be anything in that room except another listener. Director Harold Pike walked onto the stage. He was 90 years old now. His hair was entirely white and thin. His hands shook slightly as he arranged his notes. He was smaller than I remembered. His suit was the same plain dark suit, though now it hung loosely on him. He looked, I thought, like a man who had lived a long life and was tired, and who had one more thing to say before he rested. He spoke for an hour. He did not shout. He did not pound the podium. He spoke the way he had spoken in the obsidian hall, calmly and clearly and without any decoration, and every person in that great hall listened without moving. He spoke about patience. He spoke about the long human tradition, older than space travel, of simply refusing to be part of what was unjust. He spoke about how his grandmother, during some old conflict on Earth, had walked out of a church when the priest said something cruel about her neighbors, and had never gone back, and had raised her children to know that some rooms you simply do not stand in, no matter who else is standing in them. He said near the end, "We do not punish the proud. We have learned that punishment feeds pride. We simply decline to stand in rooms where we are not seen, and we trust that time and the quiet work of consequence will do what our anger never could. This is not weakness. It is the only real strength I have ever known." I could not breathe. I sat in the back row and I could not breathe. The lecture ended. The audience applauded for a long time. Director Pike bowed slightly and began to gather his papers. The hall emptied slowly. I did not move. When the hall was almost empty, I stood up. I walked down the long aisle. My legs were shaking. I did not know what I was going to say. I only knew I had to say something, or I would regret it for the rest of my life. He saw me coming. He was a quiet old man, but his eyes were still sharp. He watched me walk toward him, and he waited, and he did not smile, and he did not frown. He simply waited. I stopped in front of the stage. I took off my hat. I looked up at him. Then I did something no princess of the 7 crowns had ever done for any being not of the royal blood. I knelt. Not the formal kneel of ceremony, with one knee and a straight back. The full kneel of a person who has done a great wrong and has spent 50 years trying to become worthy of saying so. Both knees on the stone floor. My forehead almost to the ground. My hands open at my sides. I said in a voice that shook very much, "Director Pike, I am the princess who spoke out of turn. I am the girl from the Obsidian Hall. I have spent 52 years of my life trying to understand why you were right to walk away. I do not ask forgiveness. I have not earned the right to ask. I ask only that you know. I understand now. I am sorry." The hall was very quiet. I could hear my own breath. I could hear the old man's breath, slightly labored above me. There was a long silence. I kept my head down. I did not look up. I was afraid to look up. Then I heard him move. I heard his steps on the wooden stage. I heard him come to the edge and slowly, carefully, climb down the small flight of steps to the floor where I knelt. I heard him walk toward me. I saw his old polished shoes stop in front of my bowed head. He placed a thin, shaking hand on my shoulder. The hand was very light. It weighed almost nothing. It weighed everything in the universe. "Stand up," he said quietly. "Stand up, Valisra." He knew my name. He had known it all along, of course he had. I stood up slowly. I looked at him. He was looking at me, really looking for the second time in my life. His pale gray eyes were wet. "I remembered you," he said. "Every year. Every time I saw the reports of your empire's slow troubles, I remembered the young woman in the great black hall. And I wondered every year whether she had learned. And I hoped she had. I hoped it very much." "Why?" I whispered. "Why did you hope?" "'Cause," he said, "I have a granddaughter who is 94 years old in human reckoning, which is of course nothing, but in her own way she is also sometimes proud and sometimes loud and sometimes foolish, as the young often are. And I thought often that if she ever did what you did in some room I could not see, I would hope someone somewhere would give her the chance to learn, and the years to become better and the courage to kneel when she finally understood. I hoped that for her. So I hoped it for you too." I could not speak. I could not see for the tears. He guided me gently to a small office behind the stage. He sat me down. He made tea himself slowly with hands that shook. He gave me a cup. He sat across from me and he asked me about my life, about Edinburgh, about my studies, about Owen and Priya and the baker Peter Hollies and his wife Margaret. I told him everything. He listened the way he had listened to my mother 52 years before, calmly, without interruption, with the full attention of a man who understood that listening was the beginning of all wisdom. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What will you do now?" "I do not know," I said. "I thought perhaps if I could find a way to be useful, if I could go home and try to rebuild even a little. My sister is the empress now. She is wiser than I ever was. She might allow me to serve." "She will allow you," he said, "and you will serve well. You have learned things now that are very rare. Go home, Valisra. Your mother was right. The work is waiting for you, and I think this time you will do it well." "Will you?" I began and stopped. I did not know how to ask. "Will I help?" he said. He smiled faintly. "I am 90 years old. I will be dead in a few years, but the Terran conquered is not one man, and the doors that were closed because of one afternoon may be opened slowly by many afternoons of different work. I will speak to those who come after me. I will tell them what I saw today. I will tell them the princess came back. That will matter. It will not fix everything. It will start something." I began to cry again. I could not help it. He reached across the small table and held my hands in his old shaking hands around my silver hands, and we sat like that for a long time, and I knew that my life, the real part of my life, the part that mattered, had finally begun. I went home to the Dominion 3 months later. My sister, the Empress Alia, met me at the landing field. She was older now and tired, and she embraced me and wept, and she said, "Welcome home, sister. We have work to do." I asked for no title. I asked for no crown. I asked only for a desk and a commission. She gave me both. My commission was to serve as diplomatic liaison to the Terran conquered, in whatever form that contact might take, for as long as I lived. The work was slow. Director Harold Pike died 2 years after our meeting. I flew to Earth for his funeral. I was the only non-human there. His granddaughter, a quiet young woman named Clara Pike, embraced me in the churchyard and said, "He spoke of you at the end. He said you gave him hope for the galaxy. He said if one proud princess could learn, then it was not too late for anyone." I wept again. I weep easily now. It is one of the things I have learned to do. I was not taught it as a girl. The doors began to open slowly. Not all at once, not even mostly, but slowly. A joint research mission here, a cultural exchange there, a medical aid convoy to a Dominion colony struck by plague. Each small act was a stitch in a great wound, and the wound was large and the stitches were small, but over the years the stitches accumulated. The fold stabilizer was never offered to us on the old terms. That ship had sailed, and fairly so. But other doors opened, some of them doors we had not known existed. Human engineers helped us design a different kind of drive, less efficient than the fold stabilizer, but better than anything we had on our own. Human teachers came to our universities and taught our children, and our teachers went to their universities and taught theirs. A human literature department opened at the Royal Academy in our capital. A Dominion philosophy department opened at a university in Boston. These things did not restore the empire my ignorance had broken. Nothing could restore that. But they built something different, something new, something that my mother would have wept to see, and I wept, seeing it in her place. I served as liaison for 153 years. I lived by then mostly on Earth. I had a small house in the hills outside Edinburgh, not far from the university where I had first learned to be nothing. Owen, grown old and gray, visited me every year until he died. Priya wrote me letters until her hands no longer could. Their grandchildren visited me too, because I had become a kind of honorary aunt to their families. The silver-skinned woman in the hills who told old stories and made bad tea and loved them all very much. My sister Alia died. Her daughter became empress. I advised the new empress when she asked, and I did not advise her when she did not ask, because I had learned finally when to speak and when to be quiet. I am very old now as I write these words. I am nearly 350 years old. My silver skin has faded to pale gray. My hair is thin and white. My hands shake when I write, the way Director Pike's hands shook when he wrote in his last years. I do not have many more years. I do not mind. I have had more years than I deserved, and I have tried to use them well, and if I have failed, I have at least failed in the right direction. Young diplomats come to see me sometimes. Th. Corin, humans, Vareth, Kelvash, species we did not even know existed when I was a girl. They ask me for wisdom. They expect, I think, something grand, something royal, something ancient. I tell them all the same small thing. I tell them that I was 94 years old once, and very proud, and very stupid, and I stood in a great hall and insulted a quiet gray man who had done me no wrong, and he walked away without a glance, and that silent walking away taught me more, over the long years that followed, than all the tutors of the 7 crowns had taught me in the century before. I tell them that humility is not a gift that can be given to the proud. It must be taken from them slowly, gently, by those brave enough to refuse to play their games. I tell them that the humans of Earth were, and remain, the bravest species I have ever known, not because they fight, but because they refuse. They refuse to be smaller than they are. They refuse to kneel to those who have not earned their kneeling. They refuse, when insulted, to become the kind of people who return insult for insult. They simply walk away. And in walking away, they leave behind them a silence that does what no argument can do. It teaches. It taught me. I was lucky. Many in my position have not been taught. Many empires, given the same chance I was given, have continued in their pride and have crumbled and have never understood why. I was given a mother who wept, and a sorrow deep enough to send me to a small, rainy city on a foreign world, and a teacher who told me I had potential, and a young baker named Peter Hollies who sold me bread every morning and never once asked me who I had been. I was given friends who teased me until I learned to laugh at myself. I was given an old gray man who looked at me only twice in his life, and both times changed me forever. I have had, all things considered, a blessed life, far more blessed than I deserved, and if there is any wisdom I can leave to those who come after me, it is this. Do not be afraid to walk away from those who do not see you. It is now weakness. It is the beginning of your strength, and it may, if you are very fortunate, be the beginning of theirs. The young princess spoke out of turn. The human walked away without a glance. And in that quiet turning, in that closing of great black doors, in that small, unmarked ship rising into clouds above the proud and foolish capital of life began that was better than the one the princess had been born to. And then empire began to learn a lesson. It needed to learn for 6,000 years. I write these words in a small house in the rain with a cup of tea cooling beside me, and I'm not sorry. Not for the learning, not for the long years, not for the sorrow, not for the work, not for any of it. I am only grateful, and I hope wherever he rests that the quiet gray man who walked It built something. It built me for whatever small thing I am worth. And through me, perhaps it built a little more peace in the galaxy that needs it. Always more than it knows. That is the whole of my story. I have nothing else to say. I put down my pen. I look out the window at the sun.